Who really knows you, and why does deep connection matter? We're going to unpack that today, and I'm joined right now by Dr. Curt Thompson, who is a psychiatrist, author, speaker, and the co-host of the Being Known podcast. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm really excited for this conversation about community and connection. Now, let's just start with what your specialty is, interpersonal neurobiology. So could you just simplify that for us?
Sure. It's a bit of a mouthful, I understand. Interpersonal neurobiology is a general field of study that includes a number of scientific disciplines that all have a stake in two questions. Number one, what is the mind? And number two, what does a mind look like that is flourishing? We have all kinds of data that tell us pretty easily what a mind looks like that is not flourishing well, that is sick, that is unwell. But what does a mind look like that's actually well? And so that is a field of study that's emerged over the last 20 years that has helped us answer that question. And as a psychiatrist, it's been a great joy to be able to apply these scientific principles, especially working with people within a faith community, because it really gets at this notion that God never leaves himself without a witness. God is even using principles that we're discovering in this particular scientific discipline to speak back into how we operate as human beings, and as it turns out, really reflects very deeply what we learn about, read about, and encounter that the biblical narrative tells us that it means for us to be human beings and what it means for us as humans to flourish under the lordship of Jesus.
Now, you've really centered in your talks anyway, a lot about connection. And you gave a piece of information that really fascinated me, which is that a baby, only 10 to 15% of a baby's brain cell can do what it's supposed to do by itself.
That's right.
So can you just unpack that for us?
So we say newborns come into the world roughly, on average, having about 100 billion neurons. And about 15 to 20% of those neurons are able to do what they are doing and enabling that newborn, an infant, to do what they're supposed to do. But in order for them to grow and to move from newborn to infant to toddler and so forth, it requires them, and for their mind to expand and flourish, it requires the rest of those neurons, about 80 to 85%, to be fired by having an interaction with another human being. This, of course, might put pressure on parents, but in fact, we're doing this all the time by looking at our child, by speaking with our child, by holding our child. So it's not as if we have to give them a PhD right out of the womb, but it is a matter of our interacting, being attuned to them, and it doesn't mean that we have to be attuned to them all the time, but it really emphasizes how who we are becoming is deeply relational in its fundamental elements. I'm not a person who, in my siloed self, just happens to grow up in a family where they feed me and they're nice to me, and then I go off and get an education, and then I become who I want to become. I'm only ever becoming who I am in relationship with other people, and my capacity for growing into the fullness of who I am called to be, and therefore to do the works that have been prepared for me before the foundation of the world, is to develop as I was made, in God's image, as a social creature, not as an individually siloed one.
I think this message is so timely for the world we live in. And I think of babies who maybe don't have that. You know, you say that every baby is born looking for somebody who is looking for them. Mm-hmm. If that baby is born and is looking for that person, but no one's looking for them, you know, let's say in an orphanage or an environment that has a lot of neglect, what is the implications of that then for their development?
Well, I think in some respects, it doesn't really take a psychiatrist to help us guess that things are going to be much more difficult. I think it is important to recognize that God has made us as fairly resilient creatures. There's a lot that we do well in spite of a great deal of trauma, a great deal of tragedy. And the other good news is that even for folks who in the early developmental stages of their lives may not receive what is ideal for them, the really beautiful news is that the brain is never beyond the capacity for change.
Wow.
We have had numerous stories told of people who are older in life, who of course imagine that because things happened when they were younger, traumatic events that took place when they were in the first 2 decades of life, but now they're in their 50s, 60s, 70s, even 80s, there's nothing I can do about the past because the past has already happened. The really beautiful news about what we're discovering over the last 20 years about the capacity of the brain to change, especially in the context of relationships by whom I'm being deeply known, is that it's never too late. And then we look at the Bible and we think, oh my goodness, Moses was 80 years old when he got the call. He was 40 years old when he went into the desert. God waited for 40 years to get him ready to do this. 80 years old. Abraham, 75 years of age. Nicodemus comes to Jesus, seemingly as an older teacher. These are people that God is confident in working with. In many respects, we would say now, because we've actually seen the organ that God has put between our ears and the capacity that we have for change that really gives us hope that Paul talks about when he says, therefore, don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And that renewal for Paul, though he would not have known necessarily about how many neurons we have, is not just metaphor for us today. It is an embodied and relational change that's taking place that's a reflection of the gospel.
I love the hope that you're giving there. And I think it's so interesting that you're a psychiatrist. So, obviously you've learned about the problems that we can have with our brain functioning well. And yet you speak with so much hope and life. And I love that. I think that's what the gospel is. You also talk about energy that happens in a room and that really matters. Why does it matter that we understand the way that the energy is happening between us and other people?
Well, again, without our knowing it, we have been, as we like to say, we have been atomized in our world. The dominant narrative in the world that teaches us that human beings are machines and we are individual machines also teaches us that I am the most important, let alone only thing that's happening in the room, even with other people. Now, I might be able to recognize that there are other people here at the party, that there are other people here at the conference table, there are other people here in this conversation. I may recognize that, but I'm not really that aware of the role that this network of human beings together are playing in shaping who I am becoming. I think one of the beautiful things about some of the work that we are doing is that out of this has emerged our awareness of what I would call the mass effect of human relationships. If a person sits with a psychotherapist over a certain amount of time, there will be a certain amount of change that takes place. If that same person sits in a room of community members who are vulnerably doing the same kind of work that that patient is doing collectively, the pace and depth of which that change takes place is much different. Because my capacity for receiving empathy from one person is very different than when I receive it from 7 other people at one time. My capacity to have people in my memory when I next have to go do a very difficult thing is very different than when I only have one person. And so this body of Jesus effect that we once again read about in the scriptures is something that we would say Paul is not just using this as metaphor. Paul is using this to highlight that we as a body are making a difference in the world. I'm not expected as an individual to make a difference just by myself, even though I think that's what I'm being asked to do. But I'm being asked to live this life in Jesus collectively as part of this social net that itself is helping to transform who I'm becoming.
And I know when I use the word energy, some people are thinking it's something new age or good vibes or something like that. Can you just break it down a little bit? Like, what do you mean when you say energy?
Well, I quite literally mean energy. Like when we talk about energy that comes off of our power plants and energy that comes from, neuroelectrical feeds, these kinds of things, when we're talking about quantum mechanics here, really. When we are talking with someone in the room, it's not surprising that when I'm with someone that I really enjoy being with, one could later go and watch a video of that interchange, and we could notice how the energy between us, the way we talk to each other, our body language, all those kinds of things might be very different than if I'm talking with someone who's boring me to tears. It's going to just be a very different kind of hangout, as it turns out. But the point being that this energy that we have within us and between us is the world that God has made. We as creatures of the earth are not separate from the earth. We are actually creatures that are communicating with each other. 60 to 90% of all human communication is nonverbal. It doesn't have to do with the words. It doesn't have to do with what my logical, linear thinking brain is comprehending. It has to do with what my voice is saying to your voice, what my ears are hearing, the vocal tone, the eye contact. All of those are gestures. All of those nonverbal cues are sending signals, literally because of the light waves and the sound waves that communicate things to us. And so one of the things that we really focus on when we are inviting people into this transformational process is an invitation for them to consider that others that they are going to encounter today, those others' lives are going to be different because they've encountered the beauty that is emerging from within you. Most of us don't walk out of our front doors thinking, oh my goodness, I wonder whose lives are going to be different and better because I showed up for them today. I'm just trying to get through my freaking day. I'm not imagining these things. But my capacity to imagine that I am the light of the world, as Jesus speaks in Matthew chapter 5, right? I'm a light because I am a reflection of this light. I am the light of the world. My capacity to imagine that has everything to do with the degree to which I myself feel like I have been loved. And that's where community makes all the difference. It's my encounter with God personally, and also how that is reinforced and strengthened and thickened by virtue of my encounter with others through whom God is also equally loving me.
You actually say it's easier for us to give love, to love others, than it is to really receive it. What is the barrier that makes it so hard for us to receive the love that can transform us and then transform others?
You know, it's such a great question. We are people who pay a lot of attention in the world, even when we are not aware that we're doing this. We are paying attention to what frightens us. And we love until love shows up at our doorstep. Because then love makes demands on me. Like, I didn't think that love demanded anything of me. Oh, of course it does. It demands that I love my neighbor. It demands that I allow myself to seek forgiveness and to forgive. It invites me to reveal the parts of me that are not yet healed so that love can heal it. But I'm afraid because that requires intimacy. That requires my giving you access to parts of me that intimacy in the past has been the source of my wounding. Mm. And so as much as I love the idea of love, it is also the thing that frightens me more than anything else in the world, which is why even though we look around and we see we're not very good at loving other people, we would say that we have difficulty with that primarily because we first have an even greater difficulty in allowing ourselves to be loved because of the same fear that Adam had when God comes walking in the cool of the afternoon. Adam's telling a story that God is coming to kill him. God's telling a very different story. But Adam would not let God tell a different story. Adam's already throwing his wife under the bus. And so as to continue to tell the story that he was telling before God came walking. And this is what we are doing all the time. And so we can show up wanting to love others, only to find that it's really difficult for them to let us do that, and vice versa for ourselves.
Yeah. So, when we think something's happening in the room, we're telling ourselves a story about it, whatever we think is going on. But we may not be right. So how do you start shifting the story you're telling yourself? Because that really is a big part of the problem, isn't it?
Right. Well, this is where we say there are a number of different things that we learn about storytelling and human beings. And one of those important realities about storytelling is that we never tell stories by ourselves. I am always, as an adult, I perhaps am the first author in the paper that I'm writing, but I am never a solo author. There are always going to be others who are collaborating with me when I tell my story. So an important question is, who are the people who are helping you tell the story of your life in the way that is most true to the gospel? Who are the people who are helping us do this? This is an important question. So when we ask, well, how can I make sure that I'm telling the story truly? We would say, oh, I don't do that. We do that. And so I'm going to need people in my life who are willing to ask me questions and to whom I am willing to be open whom I am willing to be vulnerable, people who I put in the position of naming things for me that I don't see about myself. That practice of being deeply known in that way not only reveals to me who I am, it also enables me to practice what it's like to become comfortable with that very process, and also to see the value of it. I learned, oh my goodness, like I become more of who I'm supposed to be because I allow someone else to have access to my life. And it is in that regard that I learn more of what is true, not just about what I'm doing now, but learn more what is true about the previous life that I've been living. What was it really like when I was in my first 2 decades of life, in my 30s and 40s and so forth? And so for us, as believers, we would say also to live as God has caused us to live in His image. Let us make mankind in our image. We are relationally image-bearing creatures. That means that in order for me to know who I am and therefore be able to be curious about who other people are, I only ever learn how to do that in the context of connected community.
And I think some people listening might be thinking, that sounds good. I mean, it sounds kind of scary. It sounds hard. How do I find those people I can trust? And how do I find my community?
Right. It's really difficult. I mean, there's no easy way about this. And we would say, God knows exactly what it's like for us to have to do this. You may, well, I don't know, what do you mean about this? The author Paul Borgman wrote so beautifully in Genesis, the story we haven't heard. He asks this question: how many people did God have to ask before in Abraham he finally found someone who said, yes, I will go with you to Canaan? We don't know because there's no story told about that. But it's completely plausible to consider that God had to ask a number of people, and finally someone said, I would go. We know that when we get to the Gospels, Jesus asks a number of people to follow him who say, no, I got to go bury my dad. I got to go check out the plot of land that I just bought, all the things. There are people who say no to him. Jesus also might have come to earth and been asking God, like, well, where am I supposed to find these people? And what we read is, we read a person who is going to just start to ask people, recognizing that they may say no. And if this person says no, then I'm going to ask the next person, and I'm going to ask the next person. And so for our listeners, we might say, first of all, this is not easy to do. Evil does not want us to do this. God knows that this is hard to do. And God could not be more excited that you're even considering doing it. Because the moment that you say, okay, I'm going to pick one person, and I'm going to ask them, will you be willing to share your story with me if I share my story with you? And if you're looking for some guidelines, I've written a couple of books where people can get this. But if we want to do this, and if someone says yes, then we ask a third person, and then we ask a fourth person. But the point being that the very act of taking these steps forward is one of the ways in which we are bearing God's image. For indeed, this is the way that God came into the world. He came into the world telling a story. This is what the Bible is. It is a story that is being told. And look at God. Like, he took a risk on us, and look what we did with his project. And he has not given up on that project of continuing to seek us out and to say to us, will you please partner with me? Will you please listen to me tell you my story while you tell me yours, so that we can co-labor with you doing those works that I've made for you from before the foundation of the world?
I think the whole story from beginning to end is a pursuit of intimacy. God with us and then us with others. You really talk about Jesus looking at the worst parts of ourselves and loving us and not turning away. Can you just unpack that a little bit? I'm just thinking of people watching who have a hard time believing that.
Yeah. Well, I think, one of the examples I give is, it's well known for many of our listeners, if we're familiar with the Gospels. There's a story about a woman who has a bleeding problem. Common in 3 of the Gospels. In Mark's version of this, she comes, she has a plan. She knows what her problem is. Many of us, we come to Jesus and I can tell you what my problem is. And she knows what her problem is, her bleeding. And she has a plan for commando healing. We're going to get in, get the job done, get out. Nobody's going to know, right? All very quiet. And then we remember what happens. She knew in her body that the bleeding had stopped. The text reads in Mark's Gospel that she knew that she was healed. She had a sense. Or did she? Because all at once, Jesus says, "Stop. Who touched me?" And you can imagine in her mind, she's imagining like, oh crap, like this is not the way this was supposed to go down. And he's not moving anywhere. He's not going to go until someone admits to this. And we come to find out, as he waits, she finally, and the text reads, and she came to him and threw herself at his feet, and with fear and trembling, and told him everything about her. Now, this is what I think happens to us. Jesus encounters us, we encounter him, and we are joyful at the encounter, and yet there are things about us that we don't know that we don't know. There were things about this woman that were beyond her bleeding. Her bleeding means she does not have a marriage, she does not have children, she does not have a family, she does not have a community, all of which were categorically condemning social realities for her. She could be healed of her bleeding and still not have a community or a husband or a child or any of that. Because what is she going to do? Say, no, I'm clean. Really? No, seriously, I am. Believe me. Not until publicly he invites her to take this huge risk of vulnerability and say, this is my story in front of all of these people, because he is unwilling for there to be any stone of shame left unturned, much of which within our own lives we don't know that we don't know. But he does. And those by whom we are going to be deeply known, if we give them access, they can ask questions as well that introduce us to parts of ourselves that we've been keeping in the dark. But when they come into the light, healing is realized, and that then becomes energy I no longer have to burn to contain this, and this is energy that is now available to create beauty and goodness in the world with God in the way that he wants me to.
That's such a beautiful perspective. I think for somebody who is like, their hearts are hungry, I think, when they listen to what you're saying, that they want to create that beauty, they want to have that intimacy, they want to be known, and they want to know others. What are some steps they could take today? How do they even start when they realize they're in this state of isolation, I think, in a sense, and independence, like our culture lives in?
Right. Well, there are a couple things that we can do. And again, they're not necessarily easy. As we like to say, life is actually very simple and extraordinarily difficult. But it's not difficult because it's complicated. It's difficult because we have constructed narratives in my mind to keep me away from myself, to keep me from having access to the parts of me that I hate the most, that I'm afraid of and worried about. And so one of the things that we say to folks that's very easy, but when I say simple, people can begin to write things. We can actually write our story. This is one of the things that we have people do from the very beginning. Have any of our listeners ever considered beginning to write a journal? And there's a simple way to do this. Just take the first 10 years of your life and say, I want you to write for 30 minutes. Begin with your earliest memory. I just want you to begin to write. Well, what am I supposed to write? And is it going to be the important things that I'm supposed to write? Say, actually, the very act of writing itself is an act of trust that you're giving to the Spirit to say, I want you to reveal more of me to me. I'm going to write about it. Then you take another 30 minutes a week later and you write about your second decade and so forth and so on. Then comes the next risk. I want you to ask someone if they will listen to you read your journal. And you're like, no. I am not doing that. But do we want to be known? We don't have to be known, and you can continue to believe that your life is really complicated. To which we will say, okay, you don't have to. And you can remain where you are until you're no longer wanting to live in that space. And so, writing in a journal, asking one person if they would be willing, if you would be willing, together would be willing to have you read this to them, and perhaps ask them to do the same thing. But also be prayerful about this. And that's one thing that I would say is that these kinds of these exercises are invitations to commune with the Father. We don't believe that we're just doing this by ourselves in our isolated state. We believe that the Holy Spirit is active and engaged and wanting us to tell our story more truly. In the same way that she came and with fear and trembling threw herself at his feet and told him everything about her in order for her to be fully liberated. And so those are two things that our listeners can try.